Gary Gray, welcome to Capitol Hill.
Thank you, Lyndal.
You've given a strong defence of the uranium industry, but it's an industry that the Labor Party has had a troubled relationship. Is the government now firmly behind the industry, or are you, in some senses, out ahead of your colleagues?
No, the government is firmly behind the industry and behind its expansion. It's necessary for us to make sure the correct environmental protections are in place and the right regulatory framework. So, in fact, Lyndal, what I say is that there are a range of important benchmark mining institutional regulations that have been brought in as a consequence of uranium mining. So the whole idea of environmental impact statements, the whole idea of science-based regulation, the whole idea of biological environmental monitoring grows out of the uranium industry. And these are wonderful innovations that give us a better mining industry.
You also made the point that uranium is considered a cleaner fuel in carbon terms than fuels like coal, but it's not yet a fuel that Australia is prepared to use itself, is it?
That's right. In a carbon-constrained world, I think that there is no credible and realistic solution to baseload power generation that does not include a nuclear consideration. And I think that's important. In a carbon-constrained world, nuclear power plays an increasingly important role. Now, in Australia, we have a genuinely different fuel mix, a different portfolio of energy generation capability than exists, for instance, in Korea or Japan. And as a consequence of that, I don't think it's necessary that we need to consider a nuclear power generation capacity in Australia, although we do need to participate in the full cycle of nuclear activities to ensure that our universities, our technology and our international capability is where we would want it to be as one of the leading nations in the world.
Will there ever come a time where Australia does consider nuclear a viable option for the country?
That may happen. I'm certainly one who has always supported the idea of the nuclear industry, both in terms of mining and extracting uranium and also in terms of power generation. But I do accept that in Australia, the idea of nuclear power generation isn't yet a necessary step for us to take, but it's certainly one that we've discussed openly as a nation over the course of the last decade, and that's a good thing.
If nuclear is a viable baseload power in a carbon-constrained world, can Australia continue to say no to exporting uranium to India?
It's an interesting question. I think it's necessary for us also to understand that the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which has served a very good purpose over the course of the last 30 years, ensuring security in the supply chain for uranium and its trade internationally. There are increasingly opportunities for bilateral negotiations, and they're being explored with the UAE, the United Arab Emirates. And there may well be other options for the future. That's not for my portfolio, it's not for me to make observations of, but I can say that it's necessary that we ensure that uranium is only used for peaceful purposes.
It's been a little under a fortnight since the government released the details of the carbon tax. How do you think the debate's going?
It's a tough debate. It's certainly a debate that here in Western Australia has seen many extreme positions put. We've been told that the sky will cave in. We've been told, I even have some reports of constituents who've been told that their pay has been, will be taxed for the carbon tax. And there's just bizarre conversations that happen that mean that there's still a way to go to get people to understand that the 500 polluters who will pay, 75 of which are in Western Australia, will pay a price on carbon that will drive future investment that will make our environment cleaner and therefore for the future address climate change.
Given the position the government's in, given that you say there is still a long way to go to get people to understand or accept the debate, while there's 2 years to go till an election, is that really enough time for Labor to do the job it has to do to get back into a position where it can win that election?
Lyndal, we'll see. This is a government led by an intelligent Prime Minister and a determined Prime Minister. This is a government which has an agenda which we clearly put, we understood, and the community understood that we'd put a price on carbon. We understood that that would not be an easy public engagement. It hasn't been, and we still have a way to go. But we do know that we've got a public policy framework that is the best public policy framework for the current situation that Australia finds itself in. This isn't a politically driven decision that's about politics and opinion polling and focus group testing and the rest of it. This is a tough decision made for all the right long-term reasons, and we're losing a bit of skin and a bit of fur on the way through. That's how it will be. We won't be deterred from our path of bringing this to a proper conclusion, legislating and ensuring there is a price on carbon and a public policy framework around it that works, and a compensation package for those Australians who need it that's both appropriate and proportional.
There has been some criticism from members of the government about the coverage you get, particularly in the News Limited papers, the Rupert Murdoch-owned papers. You live in a city where the major daily paper is not owned by the Murdoch company. Is the coverage any better for you in Perth?
You know, we are very lucky in Western Australia. We have the best football teams, we have the best weather, and our media outlets are very good indeed. We are served by The Australian as our national daily paper and by the Financial Review as another national daily paper, and we're served well by the West Australian. So I'm very comfortable with the media mix that we've got here in WA, very comfortable that the papers serve our communities very effectively.
Some of your colleagues, though, are quite critical of the coverage they're getting from, or the coverage the government's getting from News Limited. Do you think their criticism has gone too far?
I think in some media markets, it's clear that some newspapers have sought to chase their own market share by effectively campaigning, becoming political organisations in themselves. We see this as a particular British model of newspaper publishers. It's not something that fits comfortably in the Australian culture of media, where media tends to be the organisation which reports on facts and which discusses and debates facts. And to get media to focus on fact, debate fact, is something that's very important to Australians as we debate issues such as climate change. Now, I fully accept that there will be occasions when that debate runs in the favour of those of us who are in favour of action, and sometimes it will run against us. But newspaper outlets, media itself, should argue on the facts and not be political participants or campaigners in their own right. And I think when they become that, when they step out of the bounds of being objective, fact-based outlets, arguing facts and presenting facts, that's when they generally run into trouble.
But do they run into trouble with their readers, or is there some trouble the government can cause for them?
I think they run into trouble with their own direction. They lose their way. They become campaigners rather than the outlets that provide and present information to their readers. That then affects advertising revenues. It affects how the newspaper is seen in the broader community, and I think it also severely impacts the role and reputation of journalists. And I think all of the journalists that I have met and with whom I have relationships take great pride in reporting facts. Not always as I'd like them to be reported, but they report facts, and that's what newspaper, that's what media, that's what journalists do best, and that's what they should be doing for the future.
Gary Gray, thank you very much for your time.
Lyndal, thank you.